Thank you, everyone. I heard the discussion of the weather, and when you're from Minnesota, your ears, you get going. I will note that about a month ago, it was 38 below zero without wind chill in Minnesota, and that a few years ago, it was colder on Minnesota than it was on Mars for one day. You can Google it. It happened. The Range Rover was in a warm part of Mars, and we scored colder. And now all those people are coming for the Super Bowl next weekend. And I talked to someone from our staff in Minnesota. I go, what's it? We're all ready. We're going to do the dog sledding. We're going to do the ski thing. We're going to do all this. He goes, Senator, it's going to be a little cold. So watch out for this. So I am very excited to speak here, and you know that tomorrow night we're going to hear the State of the Union, but I'm just as excited to give my first State of the Net, and I think there'll be a few differences in our speeches, so I'm very excited to be on C-SPAN 3, so we won't try to compete in that way, but I also think there may be some differences in terms of some of the focuses that I have and that I think we need to be talking about as a country. And I want to thank the Internet Education Foundation and all the groups that made this really important conference possible. While I'm not focusing on these issues in my speech, I was asked to talk about some of our security issues. You know, there are major issues of net neutrality that we're dealing with right now, and there are also big issues with broadband. I'm in a state that has a lot of rural areas, and I'm one of the founders of our rural broadband caucus in the Senate. We even have our own logo that's very unique in the Senate. And we've got a good bipartisan group, and I was disappointed that we weren't able to take some of that overseas money and put it into infrastructure, which would have included rural broadband and all broadband, but we will live to fight another day. And I think between the Universal Service Fund and some of the other ways we can find funding, we really have to up our game because we've got, farmers that are doing their business in the McDonald's parking lot. My favorite story recently was an oncologist who goes to a parking lot of a restaurant when he can't get to the hospital to do his work for his patients. So we need to see some improvement. I will say, in addition to being cold, my state is really focused on technology. We are the state that brought the world everything from the pop-up toaster to the pacemaker. We invented the black box flight recorder and even the first supercomputer. So I would say, hashtag you're welcome. So we do a lot of things in the Midwest that don't always get recognized in the tech area. That continues to be a major part of our economy. We have 17 Fortune 500 companies. We have a lot of small, thriving businesses, which is a big part of it as well. And so in that way, the internet has been really important to me. And the reason I got involved in some of this, I'd say there's a few reasons that I did. The first is that I am the daughter of a reporter. My dad spent his whole career, he's now 90 years old, or will be 90 next month. He started with the AP, and he actually, in 1960, was the one that called the race for Kennedy. There were 3 states out, Illinois, Minnesota, and California. And he knew how northern Minnesota, my relatives were all Iron Range iron ore miners, would vote, and he called it, and the guy in New York for the AP says, I have 2 words for you guys in Minnesota, be right. And they were. And so he literally interviewed everyone from Ginger Rogers to Mike Ditka, the famous coach of the Bears, to Ronald Reagan. So that is deep in my roots. Is a free press and free information and accurate information. So that's what brings me to this issue at my core. The second reason I'm so interested in this is that I spent 8 years as the lead prosecutor in Hennepin County, which is about a quarter of our state's population. And I did a lot with white collar and making sure that we had an even playing field when it came to criminal enforcement. And I say that not to scare everyone, but more to make the case that I would look at things that it didn't matter if someone committed a crime with a crowbar or they committed a crime with a computer. It's still a crime, and that our laws have to be as sophisticated as those that are breaking them, which of course applies to everything from intellectual property theft to what we're seeing across the world right now with the interference in our elections. And the third way I come at this election, at this issue, and I was thinking about this in the car on the way over, is that I've campaigned. I have run for office. And most importantly, I have run for office from a position of not having personal wealth. And so in my first race for this county attorney job, which is the chief prosecutor, I was outspent like 3 to 1, something like that, 4 to 1. I remember I could only run ads on cable, which at the time was like no one hardly had cable. So I remember the day of the election, my opponent was running them on network constantly. This is way before people were running computer ads, right? In fact, I was the first candidate ever to have put an ad on the newspaper website. Big deal at the time. And so because we had so little money, so we were looking at ways that would be cheap. And so I was on cable, and I remember some guy calls in. It was a very close race. I was running against a congressman's sister, a Republican congressman's sister. And the guy called into one of the radio stations, that Amy Klobuchar, she has ads on constantly. And the radio host goes, "Sir, do you just listen to ESPN?" Because I had black and white ads on one thing. So I knew what that was like. And I ended up by winning by less than, I think, 9 votes per precinct. In this county, which was 2 congressional districts. And I did it by not only that way, but by putting up 3,000 lawn signs, being in 29 parades, and doing 85 pancake breakfasts, okay? If I'd done 70, I would have lost. I bring this up, there's a reason for this, and that is because I have this firm belief in grassroots politics and an even playing field. And I ran for Senate. It was even more pronounced because I was running against, again, a sitting congressman for the U.S. Senate, and I had never raised more than $500 per person. And so I suddenly was calling everyone, and no one would return my call because they couldn't say my name. They didn't know who I was. And I finally gave up. This is a very true story. And I used my own personal, at the time, Rolodex. Remember when we had those? And I called everyone I ever knew in my life. And this is a true story. I still have the record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. And as my husband has pointed out, it is not an expanding base. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, it matters because I'm obsessed with having fairness in campaigns, right? So that's why I hated the Citizens United decision. That's why I don't like all this dark money that's behind the scenes. I want to have transparency. And the final reason, and I'll get to what I want to talk about so you know where I'm coming from, why I have such a passion for this, is because I'm from Minnesota, and we have the highest voting turnout in the country. And we tend to really like fairness and transparency. Some of it is our Scandinavian tradition. And so when you see this kind of shenanigans, and that is a Minnesota nice word for basically fraud and basically criminal activity influencing elections, you have a real problem on your hands. And if we want to guarantee the right for free elections, we're going to have to do something about this. And I kind of put it in 2 prongs. One I'm going to more focus on today, but the first is the election infrastructure. And Senator Langford and I have a bill along with Senator Kamala Harris and Lindsey Graham, which is focused on putting about $400 million. We found a way to pay for it with leftover grant money into our state election infrastructure. And you look at how much money that is 3% of one aircraft carrier, okay? And so when we are spending this much money on our national defense, the fact that we are being outspent and outdone on the internet when it comes to protecting our democracy in this greatest country that has developed all of these incredible technologies and the internet itself, that is a problem. And so that's why I think as we look at our own national security priorities and we look at protecting our elections, we have to start seeing our election infrastructure as a major part of that. So what's happening? Well, according to our own Department of Homeland Security, Russians attempted to hack at least 21 states' election systems in 2016. Russia also launched cyber attacks against a U.S. voting software company and hacked the emails of more than 100 local election officials. And last September, the Chicago Board of Elections reported that names, addresses, birth dates, and other sensitive information of tens of thousands of registered voters were exposed. But they didn't just try to hack into our election systems, as you all know. They also launched an extended and sophisticated information war designed to divide our country and destroy Americans' confidence in our political system. And sort of as a kind of perfect round as we go into this year, which for me has been a rather tumultuous year. By the way, almost exactly a year ago on the inaugural stage, I was replaced as the most famous Slovenian American in Washington by Melania Trump. It was very difficult. She was actually born an hour away from where my relatives are from in Slovenia. And as I said the other day, every time I look at her, it's like looking in the mirror. But in addition to that, and that year, my actual end of the year of 2016 was spent with John McCain. We're hoping his health is it's a very difficult situation, with John and Lindsey Graham on the front line with the Ukrainian troops in the middle of the night on New Year's Eve. Which one do you kiss? But it was good. There we were. And we'd also visited Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Georgia. And to hear these stories of what these countries have been dealing with for years, of foreign relations, Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee just put a report out on this, which is no surprise based on what we've heard. They have seen this movie before, right? As they get mad at Estonia, Russia does. They get in a big thing over it. And so what do? They cut off their internet simply because they moved a statue of a Russian soldier from a public square into a cemetery where the other statues like that were. Or in one of the countries with either Latvia or Lithuania, when they are having their 25th anniversary of independence, so they invite some of the Ukrainian parliamentarians who are, of course, in exile from Crimea. They invite that to the celebration, and then they cut off the internet. Russia gets mad of the parliamentarians from that country. This kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. The fake ads, the influence of the election. The best example I had was we heard directly when we were in Munich a few months later from the Norwegian Prime Minister told us this directly, and that the Russians had been mad at Norway because they've been building up their military, so they've been running some fake ads. And one of the fake ads was that Norway's economy was completely tanking and that they were running out of fruits and vegetables in the entire country of Norway. So as a result, all these Russians who had seen it on their own Russian TV were coming and arriving in Norway to see their friends and relatives with bags and bags of fruits and vegetables. And I love that story because it's not just a political intrigue story. It can hit people really directly as they try to understand what this fake news is really about. So in the US, so I go back to that story, and I remember that time with that blizzard coming at us as we're standing there with President Poroshenko to show our American might to the Russians and to Putin directly. And he's got machine guns he gives to McCain. He gave Lindsey a pistol. He gave me 2 daggers, but that's a whole nother story. But really, what we had to stand up to show our American might, right, was that we're protecting our internet, that we're a beacon of democracy. And that we're a beacon of democracy because we have a free and fair election, and we know how to handle this. Well, what we have learned since is we didn't really know how to handle it. It was not just the hacking, which we have since learned, which took way too long to tell our state election officials about, but it is also about the very essence of American political campaigns, which is how you communicate. Do you have an even playing field? That's what all our laws are set up to do, right? They're not great because there's all this dark money going on, but in fact, at least when you put ads out, you have to have disclaimers, you have to have disclosures. And so what do we find out? Well, we find out that Russia spent at least $100,000 in rubles on Facebook ads to influence the 2016 election. We know that the disinformation reached more than 126 million Americans. We know that Russia has a troll factory that employs nearly 1,000 agents, many of whom work 12-hour shifts and are expected to make hundreds of comments on social media that are intentionally divisive, all of it fake, all of it bankrolled by President Putin. So we know that there's a lot of fake stuff out there in America, right? Fake tans, fake wrestling, fake storylines on TV. We can deal with some of those fake things, but when you got people in our state that don't know that they're fake things, that is a whole nother thing when you're dealing with fake political ads, that like the ones we showed at the judiciary hearing that actually directed people to text their votes in. That happened in America, right? We have those ads that were put out on social media over and over again that said, hey, don't deal with the lines, just text in your vote for Hillary. Here's the texting number. That's criminal. That is criminal if we could have caught the people that did that, because that is a direct interference with the election. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper testified last year that Russia will continue to interfere in our political system. He said this: I believe Russia is now emboldened to continue such activities in the future, both here and around the world, and to do it even more intensely. So that next election is 281 days away from today. And that is why James Lankford and I are working so hard to try to get that funding out there. And so that's the first bill I want to mention to you guys. $386 million for election security. It also requires information to go to state election officials, and so that there are certain people in each state that would have that security clearance so they could receive that information. Do you know that that issue about the 21 states, my state didn't find out until it went public that they had tried to hack into our state? I didn't know it. I'd been talking about this issue for months. We didn't know it. In the case of Illinois, as I mentioned, they got right into the voter security. We have support for this bill from the Freedom Caucus, go figure. In the House, Mark Meadows is carrying a similar version, actually the identical bill to one that I had done with Lindsay. That is just it's a little bit different than the one that Senator Lankford and I have. Both those bills are aimed at this because there's concern on the left and on the right that if you have a hack somewhere, when you have dozens and dozens of states that haven't updated their election infrastructure equipment in the past decade. You think Russia doesn't know that? Well, they do know that, so I'm not like disclosing some secret. When you have that going on and you have, I think, something like 10 or 12 states that don't even have backup paper ballots, right? So there's no way to audit it afterwards. So what the bill does, it says, let's get some money out to the states. Let's make sure the information is shared from Homeland Security. And the third thing, let's have this auditing so that if something does go wrong, you have a way to prove it. Minnesota is unique. We've had a lot of recounts and very close elections. And the way you do that, of course, when you're trying to check out a close election or if there have been some kind of fraud, is by having these backup paper ballots. So those are the components of the bill, and it's something we'd like to get done. Okay, secondly, and this is the honest ads bill that I was mentioning here. So we had some kind of well-known hearings that went on this, and the facts that we do know are that $1.4 billion was spent on online ads in 2016, nearly 8 times the amount that was spent in 2012. Everyone agrees this trend will continue, whether it's up to $3 billion, $4 billion, we don't know that in 2018, but those are the kind of projections that we're seeing, that there's going to be a lot of migration of campaign money over to the social media side. A Pew poll found that 65% of Americans used the internet in 2016 for election-related information. online platforms are dwarfing broadcast, satellite, and cable. The largest internet platform has over 210 million American users. The largest cable provider has 22 million subscribers. So that is why when we look at our election laws, they were all designed back at the time where it was print and it was radio and it was TV, right? So that is why we want to upgrade them. That's what the Honest Ads Act is about that I introduced with Senator McCain and Senator Warner. To me, it is simply creating this even playing field and sending a message to not just Russia, to all of these countries across the world that we see this as a priority for our national security, which is protecting our longstanding freedom to vote and freedom to have fair elections. So you think about this, this is not like sharing a cat video or an SNL skit with your coworker, right? These are actual paid political ads. Will it get at all our problems? Of course it won't get at all our problems. It doesn't get at some of the bot issues I just talked about or some of the other things. But it will at least get at some of the problem, and that is the paid political ads. So that is why I ask you to look at this bill. I know that Facebook, Twitter, Google have taken some measures, which we appreciate, to upgrade their policies and have called this out as a problem from back in the last election. But I believe the only way you're going to make this work is if you apply this across the board. So it's not just one company doing one thing, another company taking this measure. And I ask when some of the companies at the hearing said, well, this would be really difficult for us to follow this kind of law. Remember what the law says now for print, radio, and TV. It says that if you have a candidate ad, which some of the providers, by the way, have said that they will put disclosures on, or if you have an ad of national legislative importance, then you have to have the disclaimer, you know, prepared and paid for by Amy Klobuchar, or whatever it is, but you also have to have the disclosure. So that means that candidates' opponents and the press are going to be able to see what these ads are. They can't just pop up on a Facebook page for, you know, one day or an hour and then go away, so no one ever knows that they existed. And so the answer we got was, well, that'll be hard for us to figure out what those ads are. My radio station in Thief River Falls, Minnesota can figure it out. They have to keep them in a file or they have to put it online. And I believe that the greatest countries in America should be able to figure out, just like our radio stations does, just like the Minneapolis Star-Tribune does, just like the network TV do or cable TV, they are able to figure out what those ads are. They get a lawyer's opinion and then they know what these ads are. That is the same thing that we have to do for paid political ads on the internet. It is one step toward protecting our elections, and I am just hopeful that people will see the light here and we'll be able to get it done. I will close with a reminder of what's at stake and why we can't wait to act. In 1923, many years before the internet, even before Sputnik and our race with Russia to space, Joseph Stalin, then General Secretary of the Soviet Communists, was asked about a vote in the Central Committee of the party. Stalin was unconcerned about the vote. After all, he explained that who voted was completely unimportant. What was extraordinarily important, he said, was who would count the votes and how. And it is now 95 years later, and sometimes it seems like we are back at square one. And now we have the Russians again trying to, in my mind, influence who votes by suppressing votes, by putting these ads out, and also possibly who counts the votes, as in our voting infrastructure. We literally have them trying to attack us on both ends. And we know they are not our only threat. Throughout the 21st century, our adversaries will continue to use cyber warfare, and we need to be prepared to defend our networks against these threats, no matter where they come from. Nothing, and I really make this case strongly despite everything you hear, nothing could be less partisan than securing the future of our elections and the freedoms that those elections preserve. It was Marco Rubio who said during this last election, you know, one time they're going after one party and one candidate, and the next time it will be the other candidate and the other party. I kind of like quoting Stalin and then quoting Marco Rubio. I thought he would, I'll tell him that today. I thought he would enjoy that. Whether you are a 4-star general, a 4th grader, or a computer engineer at Foursquare, this is an issue that unites all of us because protecting our democracy and allowing technology to flourish go hand in hand. The freedom to speak, the freedom to vote, to participate freely is closely intertwined, not just with who we are as Americans in our hearts. The daughter of a newspaper reporter, it is also about how our economy works and how we innovate and how we move forward as a nation. This will be the true measure of the state of the internet this year and the years to come. It is whether or not we can make sure, yes, it is available to all, but also whether it continues to enhance our freedoms and not limit our freedoms. So that is what I hope you think about as you hear all the presentations today, that the internet, as it has done so well for so long, should be used for truth. It should be used to shine a light, and it should be used to ensure that American people get more information, accurate information, to choose their leaders and their government and their own future. So thank you very much. Enjoy the event, and I've really appreciated being able to launch you off today. Thank you.